I knew I was in trouble the moment a certified letter arrived with the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association logo emblazoned on the envelope. It sat on my kitchen counter for 3 hours before I worked up the courage to open it, my morning coffee long since gone cold. When I finally tore it open, the contents were worse than I'd imagined. Notice of lien and intent to seize property. My name is Vincent Barrett, and I've lived in Oak Ridge Estates in Fairfield, Connecticut for almost 15 years. It's a nice enough place, manicured lawns, cookie-cutter colonials with just enough variation to avoid looking like a simulation, and neighbors who mostly keep to themselves. That last part had always been the selling point for me. The letter claimed I owed $7,850 in unpaid HOA fees, late charges, and administrative costs. According to their records, I hadn't paid in 18 months. That was complete nonsense. I had bank statements proving every payment had been made on time. What really caught my attention, though, was the specific property they threatened to seize, my workshop. It wasn't just any workshop, it was a separate structure on the edge of my property, a converted barn that predated the development by at least 70 years. It was my sanctuary, where I restored classic motorcycles and occasionally built custom furniture. The thought of the HOA taking it made my blood boil. "This has to be a mistake," I muttered, grabbing my phone. I dialed the number at the bottom of the letter. "Oak Ridge Estates, HOA, this is Patricia," answered a clipped voice. "Hi, this is Vincent Barrett at 427 Maple Lane. I just received a letter claiming I owe back HOA fees, but I've never missed a payment." "One moment." I heard keyboard clicks. "Mr. Barrett, our records indicate you haven't paid since January of last year. The board has already voted to place a lien on your workshop building." "That's impossible. I have all my bank statements showing the payments. And besides, what gives you the right to specifically target my workshop?" "The workshop appears to be in violation of several HOA covenants. According to our bylaws, structures that violate community standards can be seized and removed after proper notification, which you have now received." "What violations? That workshop was there before Oak Ridge Estates even existed." "Mr. Barrett, if you wish to dispute this, you'll need to attend the next board meeting. It's Tuesday at 7 p.m. at the community center." She hung up before I could respond. I spent the next hour digging through files in my home office, pulling together proof of every payment I'd made. Each statement showed the automatic transfer on the first of every month, like clockwork. I also found my property deed and survey documents from when I'd purchased the place in 2010. I'd never been much for HOA politics. I paid my dues, kept my lawn decent, and minded my own business. But I knew who ran the show: Judith Thornton, a woman in her 50s with perfectly highlighted hair and a personality like a cheese grater. She'd been HOA president for the past 3 years, and in that time, the number of violation notices had tripled across the neighborhood. My neighbor Sam had lost his basketball hoop to one of Judith's crusades. The Martinez family 2 streets over had been forced to repaint their house because the shade of blue was not within approved color parameters. But attempting to seize my workshop, this was a new level of overreach. I decided I needed more information before Tuesday's meeting. The next morning, I drove to the county records office. The clerk, a friendly woman named Doris who looked to be in her 70s, helped me locate the original property surveys from before the development was built. "Interesting," she said, peering over her glasses at the old documents. "Your property line extends a good 30 feet beyond where most people think it does." "What do you mean?" She pointed to the survey. "See this marker here? That's the original property boundary for what was once the Barrett farm, no relation to you, I assume." No, just a coincidence. Well, according to this, your property includes this strip of land that runs alongside what's now the main entrance to the subdivision. Her finger traced a narrow rectangle that extended from my property to what was now Oak Ridge Drive. I leaned closer. Are you saying I own part of the land where the neighborhood entrance is? It appears so. When they developed the subdivision in the early 2000s, they should have purchased this portion from the previous owner, but I don't see any record of that transaction. Looks like an oversight in the title work. My mind raced. The fancy brick entrance to Oak Ridge Estates featured a wrought iron gate that was installed 3 years ago, Judith's first improvement as HOA president. The gate that opened only with resident key fobs and made deliveries a nightmare for everyone. Can I get copies of all of this? I asked. Absolutely. It'll take me about an hour to pull everything together. While Doris worked, I walked down the street to a coffee shop and called my friend Victor, who happened to be a real estate attorney. So you're saying part of their precious gate is on your land? He asked after I explained the situation. Appears that way. What does that mean legally? Potentially a lot. If they're trying to put a lien on your property while simultaneously encroaching on your land, you've got leverage. But be careful, HOAs have a lot of power. Come by my office tomorrow and bring those documents. We'll figure out a strategy. Armed with the property records and a growing sense of righteous indignation, I decided to inspect the gate situation myself. I parked my car near the entrance and walked along the perimeter with a printout of the survey. Sure enough, about 8 feet of the decorative brick wall and part of the gate mechanism sat squarely on what was legally my property. I was taking photos with my phone when a black Lexus SUV pulled up beside me. The window rolled down to reveal Judith Thornton's scowling face. "Vincent, what are you doing?" Her voice could have flashed frozen boiling water. "Just taking some measurements, Judith." Getting my facts straight before Tuesday's meeting. Her eyes narrowed. Facts about what? About property lines. Interesting things, property lines. I held up my survey document. Did you know that part of this entrance is actually on my land? For a brief moment, her composure slipped. That's ridiculous. This is community property. Not according to the county records. Might want to double-check your facts before you start trying to seize people's buildings. Her jaw tightened. The board has already made its decision regarding your non-compliance. If you're attempting to intimidate us with false claims, nothing false about official county documents, Judith. See you Tuesday. I turned and walked away, feeling her glare burning into my back. That evening, I received 3 calls from unknown numbers. I let them all go to voicemail. 2 were from other HOA board members, suddenly very concerned about my situation and wanting to clear things up before Tuesday. The 3rd was from Judith herself, her voice tightly controlled but with an undercurrent of panic. "Vincent, after reviewing some documents, we may have made an administrative error regarding your account. Please call me back so we can resolve this matter privately." I didn't call back. Instead, I met with Victor the next day and laid out everything I'd discovered. He reviewed the documents, occasionally nodding or making notes. "They really stepped in it," he said finally. "Not only is their lien potentially fraudulent if you've been making payments, but they built a significant structure partially on your land without permission. That's textbook encroachment. So what should I do? First, document everything. Take more photos of the gate with measurements if possible. Gather all your payment records. Then, at the meeting, let them present their case first. Don't show your hand too early. And if they don't back down..." Victor leaned back in his chair. "Then we file a countersuit for the encroachment, demand removal of their gate, and seek damages for the attempted fraudulent lien. But honestly, Once they understand their position, they'll probably fold. Tuesday evening arrived with a summer thunderstorm that seemed fitting for the confrontation ahead. The community center was more crowded than usual, for an HOA meeting. Word had apparently spread about my situation. I recognized most of the faces. The Millers from down the street, whose request to install solar panels had been denied 3 times. The Johnsons, who'd fought a 6-month battle over their garden gnome collection, and at least a dozen others who'd had their own run-ins with Judith's regime. The board members sat at a long table at the front of the room. Judith occupied the center seat, flanked by the vice president, treasurer, secretary, and 3 at-large members. I took a seat in the front row, a folder of documents on my lap. Judith called the meeting to order at precisely 7:00 p.m. After rushing through approval of previous minutes and a treasurer's report, she cleared her throat. Before we move to new business, there's a matter regarding 427 Maple Lane that needs to be addressed. Mr. Barrett has disputed a notice of lien for unpaid association fees. I noticed she didn't mention the threatened seizure of my workshop. The treasurer, a nervous man named Ted Wilson, shuffled some papers. According to our records, Mr. Barrett has not made payments since January of last year, accumulating $5,400 in unpaid fees, plus $2,450 in late charges and administrative costs. That's completely false, I said, standing up. I have bank statements showing every payment was made on time, automatically withdrawn on the 1st of each month. I approached the table and placed copies of my bank statements in front of each board member. Ted looked confused. But our system shows. Your system is wrong, I interrupted. And I'd like to know why I'm being singled out with threats to seize my workshop when it's clear I've never missed a payment. Judith glanced at the bank statements, then pushed them aside. Even if there's been an accounting error, which we'll investigate, your workshop violates several covenants. It's oversized, it's not of approved architectural design, and you're running a business out of it, which is prohibited. My workshop predates this entire development. It was specifically excluded from HOA jurisdiction in the original community documents because it's a historical structure. And I don't run a business from it, it's a hobby. We've received reports of commercial activity, she insisted. People dropping off motorcycles, picking up furniture, friends, hobby projects. Nothing is sold. A murmur ran through the crowd. I could feel the support building among the neighbors who'd faced similar baseless accusations. Regardless, Judith continued, the board has determined that the structure must either be brought into compliance or removed. This was my moment. I opened my folder and pulled out the survey documents. Before we continue this discussion, I think we need to address a more pressing matter. I handed copies of the survey to each board member. According to county records, part of the subdivision entrance specifically, about 8 feet of the brick wall and part of the gate mechanism is built on land that legally belongs to me. The room went silent. Judith stared at the document, her face paling slightly. This is the original survey from before the development was built, I explained to the room. When Oak Ridge Estates was developed, this strip of land was never properly transferred. It remains part of my property. The HOA's attorney, who had been sitting quietly at the end of the table, leaned forward to examine the documents. His expression told me everything I needed to know. "Is this true?" Judith asked him quietly. He nodded slowly. "It appears there may be a boundary discrepancy that needs investigation." I pressed my advantage. "So while you've been threatening to seize my property over fees that I've actually paid, you've been maintaining a structure on my land without permission or compensation." The room erupted in whispers and side conversations. I could see several neighbors trying to hide their smiles. Judith tapped her gavel repeatedly. "Order, please. This is clearly a misunderstanding that needs to be resolved privately. I suggest we table this discussion, and I'm not interested in tabling anything," I said firmly. "I want 3 things on record tonight. First, acknowledgement that my HOA fees have been paid in full. Second, immediate withdrawal of all threats against my workshop. And third, a plan to either remove the portion of the entrance on my property or negotiate a formal easement with fair compensation." The vice president, a reasonable woman named Carol who I suspected had never fully embraced Judith's iron-fisted approach, spoke up. "I think these are reasonable requests. We should verify the payment records immediately and withdraw any lien notices if payments were made." Judith looked like she had swallowed something unpleasant. "Fine. We'll review the payment situation. And the workshop," I prompted. "We'll suspend any action regarding the workshop pending further review. And the encroachment on my property," this was where she dug in, "that requires further investigation. We can't simply take your word and these documents at face value." The HOA attorney cleared his throat. "Actually, Miss Thornton, these appear to be certified county records. If they are accurate, we should address this promptly to avoid potential liability." The meeting devolved from there. Several neighbors stood up to voice their own grievances about the HOA's aggressive enforcement tactics. Someone called for an emergency vote to suspend all property action until a full audit of HOA records could be conducted. Judith tried repeatedly to regain control of the room, but the dam had broken. After nearly 2 hours, 3 motions had passed. One to conduct an independent audit of HOA financial records, another to review all recent enforcement actions for consistency and compliance with the bylaws, and a third to establish a committee to investigate the property line issue at the subdivision entrance. As the meeting finally adjourned, neighbors I barely knew came up to shake my hand or pat me on the back. The atmosphere was almost festive, like a small revolution had succeeded. Judith, however, was not in a celebratory mood. She cornered me as I was leaving. "You've made a serious mistake, Vincent," she said, her voice low. "This isn't over." "Actually, I think it is," I replied calmly. "But if you want to push it further, my attorney is prepared to file an encroachment lawsuit first thing tomorrow. Your choice." She didn't respond, just turned on her heel and walked away. The next morning, I received another certified letter. This one acknowledged that due to a software error, my payment records had been incorrectly flagged as delinquent. All liens and threats against my workshop were formally withdrawn. The letter was signed by Carol, the vice president, not Judith. What followed was 3 months of surveying, legal negotiations, and increasingly tense HOA meetings. The independent survey confirmed what the county records showed: a 5-foot by 30-foot strip of land at the entrance was indeed legally part of my property. The gate that Judith had championed as her signature achievement sat partially on my land. The options presented were straightforward: redesign the entrance at considerable expense, or negotiate an easement with me. The HOA's insurance company, alarmed by the potential liability, pushed for quick resolution. In the end, I agreed to a permanent easement in exchange for 20 years of HOA fee exemption, and a binding amendment to the bylaws that explicitly protected my workshop from any future HOA interference. It wasn't about the money, it was about establishing boundaries, both literal and figurative. Throughout this process, more information came to light. A forensic accounting review revealed that the software error affecting my account had mysteriously affected 6 other homeowners who had openly opposed Judith's initiatives in the past. Even more damning, the contractor who installed the gate was discovered to be Judith's brother-in-law, who had been paid substantially more than competing bids had offered. By the time the annual HOA election came around in October, Judith didn't even bother to run again. Carol was elected president on a platform of transparency and reasonable enforcement. One of her first official acts was to form a committee to rewrite the architectural guidelines to be more flexible and homeowner-friendly. The gate remained in place, but the key fob system was replaced with a simpler, more reliable setup that didn't leave delivery drivers stranded at the entrance. A small, discreet plaque was installed on the gate post, acknowledging the easement agreement, a subtle reminder of the limits of HOA power. My workshop continued to be my sanctuary. If anything, the whole ordeal had reconnected me with my community. Neighbors who had previously been strangers now stopped by to chat, sometimes lingering to admire whatever motorcycle I was currently restoring. The Martinez family's son, Miguel, showed such interest that I started teaching him basic mechanics on Saturday mornings. 6 months after that fateful certified letter arrived, I was working in my workshop when a knock came at the door. It was Judith. She looked different, less polished, more human somehow. "May I come in?" she asked, her voice lacking its usual sharp edge. I hesitated, then nodded. She entered, looking around at the space with new eyes. "I never actually saw the inside before," she admitted. "It's impressive, thank you." I wiped my hands on a rag. "What can I do for you, Judith?" She took a deep breath. "I wanted to apologize. What I did targeting you and others, the gate contract, all of it was wrong." The apology seemed genuine, if difficult for her to deliver. "Why did you do it?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment. "Control, I suppose. When my husband left 3 years ago, my life felt chaotic. Running the HOA gave me structure, purpose. Somewhere along the way, I lost perspective." I nodded, understanding more than I expected to. "We all need something that makes us feel in control. For you, it's this place," she said, gesturing to the workshop. "Yeah, creating something, fixing things, it centers me." An awkward silence fell between us. "Well," she finally said, "I just wanted to say that. And to let you know I'm moving next month. Fresh start." "I hope it goes well," I said, and meant it. After she left, I returned to the vintage Triumph I was restoring, thinking about boundaries, community, and the strange ways people find to assert control over their lives. The workshop around me, safe, mine, protected, felt more valuable than ever. The following spring, the HOA organized its first ever neighborhood block party. The event was held in the community park, with food trucks, games for kids, and a local band. Carol asked if I would display some of my restored motorcycles as part of the event. I agreed, wheeling out 3 of my favorites. As I watched neighbors admiring the bikes, children playing on the grass, and former adversaries chatting amicably over paper plates of barbecue, I couldn't help but reflect on how differently things might have turned out. The entrance gate stood in the distance, still partially on my land, but now representing something different, a negotiated boundary. A reminder that communities work best when power is balanced and respect flows both ways. Sam, my basketball hoop-deprived neighbor, sidled up to me with a paper cup of lemonade. "You know, they're voting next week on revising the sports equipment guidelines. Looks like my grandkids might get to shoot hoops after all." "About time," I said. He nodded toward the motorcycles. "Never would have happened without you standing up to her. You gave everyone else the courage. I just didn't want to lose my workshop. And in saving it, you fixed a lot more." He clinked his cup against mine. "To property lines, may we all know where they are and respect them." "To property lines," I agreed. and we drank our lemonade in the sunshine of a community finding its way back to balance. The story might have ended there, with a reformed HOA and a neighborhood slowly healing from the divisions of the past. But 6 months after the block party, I received another certified letter, this one from the county prosecutor's office. They requested that I attend an interview regarding an investigation into financial irregularities at the Oak Ridge Estates HOA during Judith Thornton's tenure. Apparently, the accounting firm that conducted the audit had found enough concerning evidence to forward the matter to the authorities. I called Victor immediately. "They want me to talk about the Judith situation." "Are you a target of the investigation?" he asked. "No, just a witness." "But I'm not sure how much I should say. Judith did apologize to me." "An apology doesn't erase financial fraud if that's what happened," Victor pointed out. "Just tell them what you know. Let justice take its course." The prosecutor's office was housed in a modern building downtown. I met with Assistant District Attorney Maria Ramirez, a sharp-eyed woman with a no-nonsense demeanor. "Thank you for coming in, Mr. Barrett," she said, gesturing for me to sit. "We're investigating several potential violations related to the Oak Ridge Estates HOA finances between 2022 and 2024. I'm happy to help, but I'm not sure how much insight I can provide. I wasn't on the board. Actually, your situation helped bring this to light. When the new board commissioned that audit, they found a pattern of selective enforcement against homeowners who opposed Ms. Thornton's initiatives. But more concerning were the financial discrepancies. She laid out what they had discovered: inflated contracts with vendors connected to Judith or her family members, including the gate installation that had been central to my dispute. HOA funds used for personal expenses. Selective recording of payments from certain homeowners, creating artificial delinquencies that could later be leveraged. We believe Ms. Thornton may have embezzled upwards of $75,000 over 3 years, Ramirez concluded. I felt a strange mix of vindication and sadness. "Have you spoken with her?" "We've attempted to. She left the state shortly after the audit began. Currently, she's not responding to our requests for an interview." I thought about our last conversation in my workshop, her mention of a fresh start. Had she known then that her actions might have legal consequences? "What do you need from me?" I asked. "Your experience with the false lien and the property line dispute helps establish a pattern of behavior. We'd like a formal statement, and you may be called to testify if this goes to trial." I provided my statement, recounting everything from the original letter to the discovery of the property line issue and the subsequent revelations about the gate contract. As I spoke, I realized how calculated Judith's actions had been targeting my workshop specifically because it meant so much to me, creating leverage through falsified records. After leaving the prosecutor's office, I drove through Oak Ridge Estates, past the gate that had started it all. The community looked the same: tidy homes, well-maintained lawns, but something fundamental had changed. Neighbors waved to each other more. The oppressive feeling of being constantly monitored for violations had lifted. Carol had implemented a new approach to HOA management. Issues were addressed through conversation first, formal notices only as a last resort. The Architectural Review Committee now included a rotating position for regular homeowners, ensuring diverse perspectives. These weren't revolutionary changes, but they shifted the balance from control to collaboration. 2 weeks later, the local newspaper ran a story: "Former HOA president charged with embezzlement and fraud." Judith had been arrested in Arizona, where she'd apparently been living under her maiden name. The article detailed the charges: embezzlement, fraudulent misrepresentation, abuse of fiduciary duty, and noted that if convicted, she faced up to 7 years in prison. The news spread quickly through Oak Ridge Estates. Some neighbors expressed shock, others vindication. A few, particularly those who had been close to Judith, defended her or suggested the charges were exaggerated. I kept my own counsel. The workshop that Judith had tried to take from me became busier than ever. Miguel, my young apprentice, had progressed to helping with engine rebuilds. I started a casual weekend workshop where neighbors could bring in small projects, broken chairs, bicycles needing repair, and learn basic restoration skills. The case against Judith proceeded slowly through the legal system. I was called to provide testimony during a preliminary hearing, recounting the false claims against my property and the discovery of the gate encroachment. Judith sat at the defense table, noticeably thinner and wearing none of her usual designer attire. She didn't meet my eyes. 6 months later, facing mounting evidence, she accepted a plea deal. Guilty to lesser charges of financial misappropriation, with restitution to the HOA and 2 years of probation. The judge, noting her lack of prior criminal history and the non-violent nature of the offenses, spared her jail time but required 500 hours of community service. The day after the sentencing, I found an envelope slipped under my workshop door. Inside was a handwritten note from Judith. "Vincent, I know an apology isn't enough, but I am truly sorry for targeting you and your workshop. What began as petty power games evolved into something I never intended. The gate contract was the first step down a slippery slope. I've lost my home, my reputation, and nearly my freedom. My therapist says I should make amends where possible. I don't expect forgiveness, but wanted you to know that facing you in that courtroom, seeing the workshop I tried to take from you, made me finally understand the real damage I caused." Judith, I folded the note and tucked it into my workshop bulletin board. Forgiveness was complicated, but understanding counted for something. Life in Oak Ridge Estates settled into a new normal. The HOA still existed. There were still rules about lawn care and house colors and holiday decorations, but they were applied with reason and flexibility. The us versus them mentality had dissolved, replaced by a sense that we were all just people trying to create pleasant lives in close proximity to one another. A year after Judith's sentencing, Carol knocked on my workshop door one Saturday afternoon. Miguel and I were deep into rebuilding a 1975 Honda CB 750, parts spread across 3 workbenches. "Got a minute?" she asked. "Sure." I wiped my hands and stepped outside. "What's up?" "The board's been discussing the entrance gate. It's starting to show its age, and we're thinking about redesigning the whole entrance. Since part of it is technically on your land, even with the easement, we wanted to get your input early in the process." I appreciated the courtesy. "What are you thinking?" "Something more welcoming, less fortress-like. Maybe replace the brick with stone that matches the workshop. Actually, we've always admired how this building looks. And no key fob system, just a simple gate that stays open during the day." The idea of the entrance drawing design inspiration from my workshop, the very building Judith had tried to seize, struck me as deeply ironic. "Sounds good to me. I'd be happy to look at the plans when you have them." Carol hesitated. "There's one more thing. We're establishing a community workshop space in the old storage building by the pool. Basic tools, workbenches, a place where people can work on projects if they don't have space at home. We were hoping you might consider advising on the setup, maybe even teaching some basic classes." The request surprised me. From HOA outlaw to HOA educator, that's quite a turnaround, she laughed. "The community's evolved. We've learned some hard lessons about what happens when rules become more important than people." I thought about it. I'd be happy to help with the workshop. Miguel could assist. He's getting good enough to teach beginners. Perfect. She started to leave, then turned back. You know, that property line dispute, as difficult as it was at the time, probably saved this community. It forced us to look at what we'd become. After she left, I returned to the Honda, showing Miguel how to reassemble the carburetor. As we worked, I thought about boundaries, not just the property lines that had started this whole saga, but the personal boundaries that healthy communities respect. My workshop remained my sanctuary, but it had also become something more, a symbol of standing up for what's right, of knowing where your boundaries are and defending them when necessary. The workshop that Judith tried to take from me had, in a roundabout way, helped rebuild the community she had damaged. That evening, I sat on my porch with a cold beer, looking out at the quiet street as the summer sun began to set. My neighbor across the way had recently painted his front door a bright red, something that would have triggered immediate violation notices under Judith's reign. Now, it just added a pleasant pop of color to the street. The entrance gate was visible in the distance, still partially on my land. Soon it would be redesigned, transformed from a barrier into a welcome. That seemed fitting, a physical manifestation of the community's transformation. I thought about how easily things could have gone differently. If I hadn't checked my property deed, if I hadn't discovered the encroachment, if I had backed down when threatened. Sometimes the smallest details change everything. The workshop lights glowed warmly behind me, tools neatly arranged, projects waiting to be completed. My boundary, my space, secure. And beyond it, a community finding its way to a better balance between rules and respect, between individual rights and collective responsibilities. The property line that had caused so much conflict now served as a reminder. Sometimes you have to know exactly where you stand before you can find common ground. In saving my workshop, I had found my place in the community not as an outsider or an adversary, but as someone who had helped define what kind of neighborhood we wanted to be. As twilight deepened, I finished my beer and headed back to the workshop. There was still work to be done on the Honda, and Miguel was bringing friends tomorrow who wanted to learn basic maintenance. The space that had once been threatened was now thriving, much like Oak Ridge Estates itself, built on clearer boundaries, stronger foundations, and a newfound respect for the balance between individual rights and community needs. It turned out that knowing where the lines were drawn didn't separate us after all. It gave us the security to build connections across them.